Balázs Orbán, thank you very much for speaking to GB News.
Thank you very much for coming to Hungary.
It's a pleasure to be here. So much of the conversation about Hungary at the moment, and indeed for the last 10 years, has been your response to mass immigration, the strategies that this government has taken to respond to that challenge. What is the challenge that you have faced, and how have you responded to it?
Hungary, until 2015, was quite isolated from that civilizational challenge. But what we realized is that in 2015, 400,000 people wanted to march across our country, wanted to enter illegally, and didn't want to cooperate with the law enforcement of this country. And everybody was talking about that this is something normal, this is something positive, this is something which is a humanitarian need. And grassroots Hungarians and the Prime Minister and the Hungarian conservative right side realized that this is not true, this is something else, this is a kind of an invasion, a new era of mass migration. Is not normal that like thousands of people coming from completely different parts of the world, they're just showing up and wanted to go across and stay and overstay. So something has to be done. Control should be regained. Law and order should be restored. And then the Prime Minister decided to stop the illegal migration flow, build a fence, a physical fence, create a new legal framework which keeps the illegals out and execute that legal framework in a tough way. And after 10 years, it turned out that it was a good decision. I think the problem is unfortunately not solved. If we look around what's going on in our neighborhood, Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, we are talking about potentially millions and millions of people who are desperately want to come to Europe. They are ready to risk their life, ready to give their money to the human smugglers, because they think that if they get the chance to get into the territory of the European Union, somehow they will manage to stay. But if it happens, then the sovereignty of the country is over. So we Hungarians are trying to be prepared for the next waves as well, and ready to defend our borders and ready to keep law and order as we have right now.
You spoke about strengthening the border with fencing, a wall, so a physical barrier, a legal framework as well. How much of your strategy to deal with illegal migration and the flow of people from across the world really has revolved around targeting people smuggling gangs? Has much of the Hungarian government strategy targeted the gangs, tried to smash those human smuggling gangs around the world?
Yes, that's part of the strategy.
What percentage would you say of the success of it is
due
to targeting?
We have to. So what is very frequently mentioned by the Prime Minister, that the first defense line of Hungary is not on our southern borders, but we have to have close cooperation with the other countries on the Balkans. Mainly, we are affected by the Balkans route. So Turkey, Greece, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Serbia, and what we are doing is we're focusing on strong law enforcement cooperation with them. It requires money, it requires efforts, it requires manpower, but it has to be a joint effort.
But you'd say fundamentally the strongest route that you have to preventing illegal migration is the deterrent, the strength of your borders and the legal framework.
Yes, honestly, when 2015 we started to dig into ourselves to that problem, we realized that the entire international legal framework is actually, it's catalyzing the influx of the people. According to the Geneva Convention and some other international humanitarian legal documents and court decisions, of course, international court decisions, if you want to start a new life in another country, in a developed country, the only chance you get is if you enter that country, because immediately you get, according to the international humanitarian law, If you enter the country, you have rights, and the authorities cannot do what is needed to be done. So actually, the international humanitarian legal framework, which probably worked perfectly in the 50s and the 60s, where the situation was completely different, but now it's totally outdated. And it's actually catalyzing the influx of the people. And what we learned, partly from the Australian experience, which was introduced by former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, that we have to change this logic and this narrative. So we have to say to people that if you try to make it illegally, you will never ever get the status here in Hungary. Prevent them to enter illegally and try to get the benefits. You can apply from outside. If you get the green light, you can come in. But if you try to make it illegally, you never ever will make it. Unfortunately, the EU framework right now, after 10 years, after the outvote of the all pro-migration politicians who were in power in 2015, it's still that you have the right to enter. And then everybody in Europe is talking about distribution of the migrants who are already in and talking about the open camps for migrants. That's not how we are going to fix the problem.
This is something you've pushed back against very strongly in Hungary, and you are punished for this by Brussels directives. What sort of detail can you provide about how you are punished for it legally through financial pressures, and what further responses you might expect from Brussels down the line?
Yeah, by the European Court, we get a 200 million euro fine for that legal fence system, and since then we have to pay 1 million euro each day. Because we are not ready to change the regulation, because that would mean we have to let the people in. And of course, we don't accept the decision, and we try to do everything which is possible to fight back against it. But everybody is telling us that it's actually quite a good deal, because letting them in would cost much more for Hungary in the long term, especially. But this is not something which is acceptable. So we should have a European integration where countries are respected for defending their borders, not sanctions.
Your personal data could be exposed right now without you even knowing it. And if you want it removed, use incogni.com/GB News in the description now and get 60% off an annual plan on us. Incogni reach out to the data brokers on your behalf and request that your information be deleted from their databases. And they'll keep sending removal requests to make sure your data stays gone. Sometimes your information ends up on strange, obscure websites that automated tools just can't reach. And that's why Incogni just launched their unlimited plan with a feature called custom removals. With this, you can submit any link where your personal information appears, literally paste in the URL, and their privacy team will investigate and work to get it removed. And getting started is super easy. Hit the link in the description, create an Incogni account, and tell them whose data you want removed. Grant them permission to work on your behalf, and then all you've got to do is sit back and relax. They'll keep you updated along the way. Incogni is totally risk-free for 30 days. If you try it, it's not for you, you'll get a full refund. So take back control of your personal data today with Incogni. Use our code GBNews at checkout via the link in the description, and you'll get 60% off an annual plan.
I think a lot of British people listening to you saying this right now will feel a great sense of frustration. We are in a landlocked country as we're discussing this. You've built fences, but your country should be more susceptible and weaker to illegal migration than Britain, which has a natural moat by virtue of the English Channel, the North Sea, and yet every year for the last 7 or 8 years, we have experienced tens of thousands of small boat crossings. When you look at our strategy, which is based more on trying to smash the gangs, the human smuggling gangs, rather than a legal or physical deterrent, are you concerned that this is going to add to our failure to confront illegal migration? Would you like to see Britain change its course and perhaps be inspired by the Hungarian model?
It's a very complicated question. I'm responsible for the Hungarian people. I don't want to give any advices to the British people. What we learned in 2015 is that Australia back at that time was able to create a system and send a message to those people who were trying to go to Australia that they shouldn't do that. It was more about deterrence, politically and legally. And their message was the same. If you get on the boat, you try to make it illegally, you will not make it to Australia because we will bring you to another place, which is not a place where you want to go. So don't try to do so. Contact to our embassy somewhere else and apply legally. And I think it worked very well. This is the only way how it could work. And there are other elements, of course, like we give a lot of money to international organizations like NGOs and some very highly respected and long existing organizations, which are definitely doing something important humanitarian work in the neighboring countries where the refugees or migrants are fleeing from. But then there is a complete industry of how to transfer and how to relocate and how to distribute the people. So why don't we give our money to the local communities and try to meet with their expectation, like try to do something together with them.
Sure.
It would cost much less than what we pay for border protection first, and second, like fail the integration policies. And this is why we Hungarians have a luxury to finance our family support programs, because we don't have to spend anything on integration and social programs for migrants. We can give the money what we have directly to our families to get married, to raise kids, to have a house, and so on and so on. So this is a matter of policy priorities.
Amid the problems we've got in Britain with dealing with small boat migration and other forms of illegal migration, as you say, once they arrive, it's very hard to detain and deport such people due to international humanitarian law, the Refugee Convention.
We have to change the law.
The political opposition in Britain is saying we should perhaps leave the European Convention on Human Rights. What's your reaction to that process going through the British political debate at the moment? Because both the Conservatives and the upsurging Reform Party are supporting that measure.
I understand why they are saying this. I think what we are doing in Hungary is we try to achieve a change in the legal framework. It cannot be done alone. So if we have UK, unfortunately, with your government currently, we are not able to cooperate on that regard because they don't
Brexit.
show any interest. But we have the United States, we have the Geneva Convention, which is a universal legal framework. So I think that sooner or later, the like-minded national conservative governments should come together and change the regulation. The rest of the world would agree with that. It's only the liberal Western world who are keeping these outdated regulations in charge.
So the British government has no interest in engaging with the Hungarian government on this issue. Have you made an attempt to reach out to them to discuss changing migration law, and there's been no positive response?
Everybody knows that if somebody wants to do something radical on migration, it needs to go to the Hungarians, but it doesn't happen so far.
Are you concerned perhaps that with a human rights lawyer as our Prime Minister, there might be an additional pressure, that he's spent his whole career supporting human rights law and now he's faced with this challenge when the whole world is expecting more of a criticism of human rights law from leadership, that puts him in a tricky position?
I also have a constitutional legal background, and I think that mass migration is a human rights issue. And this is what the Hungarian Constitutional Court was talking about years ago, that those people who are part of the national community, like the ordinary Hungarian people, they also have human rights. And it's part of their human rights that they were born in a cultural environment. And to keep that cultural environment, which is around all of us, it's a value. It has to have a human rights element. It's completely neglected. Everybody is talking about the human rights of those who are coming, but what about the human rights of those who are living there for like centuries? So, and there has to be a balance. So those people who are coming, they are, part of them are in need. The humanitarian situation, partly in their own country, is not good. It's rather bad. But no one has the right to start a completely new life at the other side of the world. So a balance has to be found. And the sooner we Westerners are able to find it and create a new legal, even constitutional legal framework for that, the better it will be for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren.
Speaking about how in Hungary you are able to save money due to the money you're not spending on dealing with migration and not spending on integration, etc., to spend on your own priorities. A lot of Northern European governments spend a lot of money on integration, on managing mass migration to, I think it's fair to say, mixed outcomes. In not all areas is that particularly successful. Countries like Denmark have a better success rate of integrating foreigners than, say, the United Kingdom. When you look at the state of integration, assimilation, and how mass migratory patterns have fitted into these countries, how do you feel when you see those processes taking place and in many cases failing? When you see parallel societies, side-by-side cultures, when you see, for example, major debates in Britain about cousin marriage and about the associated concerns on how women can dress due to a mosque telling them how they can dress and those sorts of issues. What's your emotional reaction when you see Europe having those sorts of discussions? As a proud European, as a Hungarian, when you see what your friends and allies and neighbours are going through at the moment?
First of all, I don't want to mix emotions with realpolitics. We Hungarians, we don't want to save the world. We just want to save, first and foremost, ourselves. Of course, if there is an interest, we do have opinions. And actually, Hungary is a good position because this mass migration in many Western countries didn't start yesterday, it started decades ago. So we have field experience. If we look on those countries, we can see what would happen if we go to the same direction. And what we realized at the beginning is that though these mass migration flows are going on for like decades, no one was politicizing in a positive way this issue. So politically, there was no talking about it. And this is how I think many of the political elites of the Western European countries were trying to bypass or trick the ordinary people, because no one asked them whether they wanted or not. There was no social debate, open and transparent public social debate about these issues. It was just going on for like years and decades. And then when people started to realize that something changed, it's completely upside down. Those people are there, many of them having a legal status. From a human and an economic and many point of view, it's almost impossible to reverse it. But no one was asking them at the beginning whether they want it or not. So what we decided in Hungary at the beginning is that we want to ask the people first in an open and transparent way. A public debate, a national referendum, whether they want it or not. And they rejected. The overwhelming majority of the Hungarians said no. Even those who are not supporting Fidesz and the governing party, talking about hundreds of thousands of people who are not supporting Fidesz but supporting the anti-migration politics of the government, were saying they don't want mass migration, they don't want relocation, they want the government which is fighting for them. And since then we can say, if the pressure is growing on us. Look, the pressure is going on us. The migration from Brussels, the migration flows are getting more strong. So we have to get united and defend our borders. And this national unity gives us an opportunity to preserve Hungary on a no migration path. Because what we see is that, as you described in a very very good way, the results of mass migration are very controversial. So the potential, the downsides of mass migrations are bigger than the upsides. So this is what all the Western European experience are showing to us. So we don't want to go into that river and follow that path.
You are a Hungarian nationalist. You're speaking on behalf of Hungarians' interests, of course. But that also relies on what happens in Europe, right? What happens to your...
It's our neighborhood.
What happens to your friends and allies in your neighborhood matters in terms of what happens to Hungary. And
if you read the American national security strategy, this is exactly the question.
Your Prime Minister spoke earlier this week about concerns of mass migration perhaps coming from the other direction. And so while, from Western Europeans seeking refuge perhaps in Hungary as an alternative after their societies begin to fracture as a consequence of mass migration in decades gone past. So even though you're speaking about Hungary's interest and the interest of the Hungarian people, you recognise that actually Europe's response to mass migration is your interest as well. What the British government does could impact a new set of challenges for you down the line. I know you're hesitating and being drawn to comment on what European governments should do, but it matters for you too.
And there is another element of it, not just the potential fleeing of the people from Western Europe, but like there are some professors, some of them are from King's College, who came to Hungary and described their research findings, and they were saying that the likelihood of having a civil war in some of the Western European countries, it's very high. And if we have a European integration where in one country there is actually a civil war going on, this is something which affects Hungary in a negative way. So this is why we are trying to do everything what we can to find partners, allies, to work together to change the Brusselian leadership, because right now there are some national governments who probably in a communication are not speaking anymore or not dare to speak anymore in favor of mass migration. But in reality, what they are doing is actually supporting the influx of the people or not working effectively against it. And there is an international legal framework and the Brusselian bureaucratic elite, which is openly with financial tools and legal tools supporting those governments. So we have to have a new leadership in Brussels. And if that's how people decide in Western European countries, if there is a new government in those countries, we can work together and change this. I think it's not impossible to reverse things. It just requires less talk and more political action, joint political action.
When did you first visit London?
That's a hard question. 20 years ago, probably.
What was it like?
Super cool.
You loved it?
Yes. I love London. I still love London very much, although I experienced the changes.
You were referring to the findings of Professor David Betts from King's College London. He thinks that Britain and many of its urban centres are along a path towards civil war already. This has received a lot of criticism from people who think it's a bit exaggerated. But you seem to think it has some credibility.
Sure.
When you think about how you felt when you first went to London 20 years ago.
Before I became politician, I used to work for a think tank which was dealing with migration. So I had the opportunity to travel because, and I've been in Iraq, I've been in Libya, I've been in Bangladesh, so I'm in Nigeria, in the most unsecured places. I've seen what's going on there and why people are moving and what is going on. So I have and I visited many Western European so-called no-go zones. So I knew what's going on. And actually, I think something changed in the last years because previously it was an isolated issue. Low-level people who were living in neighborhoods which were directly affected by the disintegrated or not integrated migrant communities were very much aware of the fact that something bad is going on, but it didn't hit the middle class. But now I think it did, and it changed. So if I talk to ordinary British middle class, even upper middle class people, now they also know that the country is somehow changed, even if they live in neighborhoods which are not affected by gangs, but they realize that they became alien in their country. And this is not something what we want here in Hungary. We were fighting for like the sovereignty and the independence and the Hungarianness of this land for like 1,000 years. We don't want to lose it.
To go from super cool of 20 years ago to an alien in your own neighborhood now, that is a sad change.
Yeah, and faster than we all would think.
Yeah. And when you say you've seen this replicated in other parts of Europe as well, other, as you say, no-go zones, what do you think could be the solution there in your neighborhood? Because this is a Europe-wide crisis. This is something that will impact Hungarian interests as well, as we've established. You have this concern about Europeans looking to Hungary and other areas as a potential destination for them to head to. What do you see as the solutions there for your friends and allies on the continent?
Well, I think it's more simple than we think. So if we can agree, then we should close all borders immediately and not letting people in. So simple. So close borders and not letting people in. If you disagree on that, because there are some other countries who want to go to a different direction, then all countries should regain sovereignty. So give the countries opt-out in a field of migration. And then we are in the same political or economic or legal union, but many countries are having opt-out in the migration legal framework. And then we Hungarians, we will be able to create a system where we are not letting people in, and then other countries can go to other directions. Just this decision has to be made, and the problem is now we have a bureaucratic elite in Brussels right now, and the liberal elite which is controlling the international organizations and the legal framework, and they are not on our side. They are actively working against us. So mainly because they are leftist, and replacement theory is not just a theory, it's a practice. So I don't know, but something is happening.
Yes.
And it's serious.
We're talking a lot about war in this conversation, a lot of it's civil, and Britain is on a war path at the moment. It's had an announcement in the last few weeks about new schemes to get more people to join the military. And earlier this week we heard an announcement also about the so-called coalition of the willing, preparing to deploy soldiers in the event of a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine inside Ukraine, with so-called military hubs with Britain and other allied European nations. I think a lot of people in Britain are seeing this proposal and are thinking, well, our main fight actually is about our domestic issues rather than what's going on the continent. There are, of course, many people who think that we need to be in Ukraine to maintain peace on the continent. What has been the Hungarian reaction to this proposal? Does it concern you to think about European troops, NATO allies of the Hungarians, deployed in Europe after a war which is killing perhaps 30,000 people every month?
Well, the problem is right now in this situation, this is only about escalation, because deciding to send troops to Ukraine directly, it's an act of war before the peace agreement and before the agreement between United States and Russia, Ukraine and Russia. So it's just these slogans, statements, agreements. These are just brutal acts of escalation. And honestly, what we Hungarians think is that this conflict led us nowhere in the last 4 years. Hundreds and thousands of people died. The country was ruined. Millions left the country. It lost its financial sovereignty. The Russians controlling more territory than at the beginning. So the sooner we are able to stop the fight is the better for everyone. Stopping the fight requires diplomacy and requires agreement with the Russians, whether we like it or not, whether we accept what was done by the Russians or not. But if we are having acts of escalation, clear signs of escalation before the negotiations, it leads us to another way. And what I see is that in Brussels there is a preparation of a bigger and wider military operation against Russia. So the question is not just about whether we are ready to finance and support Ukraine, but as it was originally posed, how we beat Russia, which means a European-Russian war. That would be a disaster for Hungary, for Hungarian security and Hungarian economic prosperity. And we don't want to follow Europe into that path of escalation. And everybody knows, even those who are not 100% aware of all the geopolitical elements of the big stories, but everybody knows that if somebody goes into a war, it requires money. Yeah. So like it would mean that country doesn't spend its money to healthcare, to border protection, to the competitiveness, increase the competitiveness of the economy, because it has to give the money to another country which is in war. So in the Hungarian element, it also has an economic point of view. So we don't want to spend our money in Ukraine. And my job as a Hungarian official is to protect the money of the Hungarians and to help them to decrease taxes, to avoid austerity measures, to increase salaries, increase pensions, to help the young people to get married, to have children, to buy a house. And it requires a bigger Hungarian economy, and it requires the money which is not sent through Brussels to Ukraine. So we think that it's going to be there's going to be a huge political battle on that, and we hope that the Americans' peace achievement will have the result.
One of the main challenges for European nations amid the Russia-Ukraine war has been energy supply, energy security.
Sure.
Europe has relied very much on Russian energy products for many decades. Hungary is no stranger to that. In fact, since the start of the war, the Hungarian supply of Russian oil has increased, whilst many other nations have reduced their input from Russian oil products. The Czech Republic has massively declined the amount of Russian oil they bring in. And
what came into my mind is that they outvoted the government immediately.
They lost their power.
Lost the election because prices went up.
Sure, prices have gone up in the Czech Republic.
If you introduce sanctions, it affects the everyday life of the people.
But you have been able to negotiate for a special carve-out away from sanctions with the US government, possibly due to the close relationship between Viktor Orbán and Donald Trump. You haven't got much time left on that sanction carve-out, perhaps a year. And at the same time, we heard from your energy minister earlier today, you're still working on perhaps adapting your oil refineries to permit other forms of oil to come into Hungarian circulation. He told us it could be done around 2027. Your Prime Minister says that energy is the number one priority for the Hungarian government, energy security being a part of that, of course. How confident are you that Hungary could very soon be in a situation where it is less reliant on one energy source the Russian oil sector?
So what we achieved after 2010, when my prime minister came into power, is that since actually 2012, the Hungarian households are paying the lowest energy prices in the European Union. And we want to keep it that way because it helps the middle class. So for lower class and middle class people, utility cost cuts are very important. And the lower the energy prices, the more money they have to spend on their own needs. So in the last 10 years, actually the European Union and the European regulation made this decision not easier but harder. Three things happened. First of all, somebody came up with an idea that the nuclear energy is not good, it's rather bad. So we should stop dealing with nuclear energy. That's the stupidest idea I ever heard. But in Germany and many other countries, they followed this ideologically green idea, and then energy prices went up, and the level of pollution also went up. The second, there is a green transition which is going on. It's happening. Being green is good, but being ideologically green is not good, because then the transition costs has to be paid by the companies and by the households. And this is what's happening everywhere. And it's not because of the technological development, it's because of the legal regulations posed by Brussels on the member state. And the third thing, when the war started again in 2022, the Commission and the European leaders were saying that this is how we get Russia on their knees, through sanctions, or we will win the war. But it was a ridiculous idea also back at that time. But since then, it turned out that it is a ridiculous idea. Actually, nothing happened with the Russian economy, and Hungarian companies and European companies are suffering from the consequences. So energy sovereignty cannot mean that you cut out one energy resource. Mm-hmm. It's not logical, it's not rational. From the Hungarian point of view, energy sovereignty and widening the maneuvering space and widening the opportunities and lowering the costs means that we use different resources and we use different routes. We are building a new nuclear power plant. We are ahead of the solar energy, the battery industry as well. But we also buy energy from the Arab world, from the Central Asian world, from the Russian world, from the Western world. And we don't want to lose this mix, because if we lose this mix, it would cause us supply problems, first and foremost. So we are not able to get our supplies now, and it would cause us serious price increases, which would make life not affordable for the Hungarian households. So Fidesz is now very openly campaigning in a campaign that we should reject Brussels ideas to go against the Paks nuclear power plant, to accept the sanctions policies of Brussels, and so on and so on. We should resist, because otherwise there's going to be a problem. Imagine the situation, how ridiculously Europe will look like if there is a American-Russian energy agreement, and all the cheap Russian energy will be used by the Americans. It's possible. I'm not saying it's 100%, but it's possible. And then what the British officials, or the German officials, or the European officials will say.
You know, I think back to 10 years ago, listening to all the arguments around whether or not Britain should stay or leave the European Union. And it was a very intense period of debate in Britain. Of course, one of the most intense periods of recent decades. I think about some of the language that Brexiteers used. It sounds a bit weaker than some of the stuff you're saying, that you want to dethrone the Brussels elite, you're putting up with ridiculous ideas, from people with all these theories about how your country should be run. It must be so frustrating for you to, in a sense, despise their politics and their plans so much, but also to be reliant on them so much. What a horrible situation to be in.
We Hungarians are somehow get used to it. We were fighting for our sovereignty, for example, against the Habsburgs for like centuries, and most of these fights were like legal battles about competences. So I think we are the most prepared and advanced nation on the legal and political battles in Europe. We don't have the luxury to leave. We need the European Union. We think that we are part and we are a proud member of European Union. We just don't like the madness. But I think if I travel around Europe, there are many millions and millions of ordinary European citizens, and they have the same feeling. And probably it's not a coincidence that we are members of the Patriots, and now Patriots are leading the polls in France, in Germany. They are in government in Italy. They very often in government in the Netherlands. They are the government now in the Czech Republic. They are leading the polls in Austria. So I see that that this kind of attitude towards having a completely different leadership in Brussels, now it seems more possible than 10 years ago or 9 years ago when Brexit was decided.
Just finally, we're going to visit the border tomorrow. Could you imagine a scenario where the Hungarian people would ever permit or allow its government to have tens of thousands of people arriving, turning up in their country illegally, being given hotel accommodation, being given legal support to fight to stay in the country, and then also resisting deportation even after they lose those legal cases? Can you imagine a scenario where the Hungarian people would ever permit that?
Well, we are getting closer to elections and see what the political alternative is. We have an opposition which is backed by Brussels. They are actually openly saying that there should be a government change in Hungary, and that guy who is leading the opposition should be in charge. Of course, it would mean the adaptation to the Brussels needs in the field of migration as well. So this is why we think we should avoid this. We shouldn't. You
don't want to end up like Britain, really, don't you? You don't want to end up with the small boats crisis equivalent.
Yeah. We shouldn't do that mistake. So this is what the campaign is about. That we have to warn the Hungarian people that this is actually possible, because this is what is the everyday reality. And once you are entered to that trap, it's almost impossible to escape from that. So one bad choice, and you lose the future. So this is why you're trying to catalyze, mobilize, create a social movement against the Brussels candidates. And honestly, I think it works very well. And people are getting more vocal and active and united and backing the Prime Minister.
Britain is a warning.
It is.
Balázs Orbán, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.